Okay, good morning. Let's begin. We're in Perek Test. So it is in the Humashim, in the art scroll in the back. They have the Megillot. And let's find the page. It's on page 1259. Okay. Let's just get our feet wet in the text itself, if you will, so we understand what the text is. Perek Test on page 1259. ובשנים-עשר חודש הוא חודש אדר, ב13 יום בו אשר הגיע לדבר מלך ודתו לעשות ביום אשר דיברו אויבי היהודים לשלוט בהם ונהפוכו אשר ישלטו היהודים המה בשונאיהם. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, when the king's command and edict were about to be enforced, on the very day that the enemies of the Jews expected to gain the upper hand over them, and it was turned about. Everything turned upside down. And the Jews gained the upper hand over their adversaries. Nikalu hayudim ba'areihem b'chol medinot hamelach Achashverosh l'shloach yod mevakshei ra'atam v'ish lo amad lifneihem ki nafal pachtam akol va'amin. The Jews organized themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Achashverosh to attack those who sought to hurt them, and no one stood in their way, for fear of them had fallen upon the peoples. Moreover, all the provincial officials, the satraps, the governors, and those that conduct the king's affairs deferred to the Jews because of the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was now preeminent in the royal palace, and his fame was spreading throughout all of the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew increasingly greater. And the Jews struck at all their enemies with their swords, slaughtering and annihilating, and they treated their enemies as they pleased. In Shushan alone, the capital, the Jews slew and annihilated 500 men. And who else? All of the 10 sons of Haman, Ves Nidosov, Ves Salton, Ves Aspotov, Ves Porosov, Ves Aldaya, Ves Aridosov, Ves Parmashtov, Ves Arisa, Ves Aridai, Ves Vaizosov, Aseret Bnei Haman ben Hamdasa, Torah Hayudim Harugu, Uvabizah Lo Shalchu Es Yadam. And the 10 names, right? Son of Haman, the Torah Yudim, the one who hated the Jews, he was the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils, right? But they did not lay their hands on the spoils. Then by Yomahu, the same day, the number of those killed in Shushan, the capital, was reported to the king. By Esther, Hamalka b'Shushan Abira, Hargu Ayudim v'Abech Hamesh Me'ot Ish, V'Sateret B'nei Haman, B'Shar Medinot HaMelech Me'atu, U'Mashe L'Tzeich Minotein Loch, U'Mabakashoteich Od V'Te'ot. And so the king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews have slain and annihilated 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What must they have done in the rest of the king's provinces? You know, it's just the Jews are really being victorious. What is your request now? It shall be granted. Whatever you ask, it shall be granted to you. What is your petition further? It shall be fulfilled. Vatomer Esther im Amalek Tovina, saying, Gam lachol hayudim asher b'Shushan lasot kedas hayom v'asateret b'nei Haman v'yitlu aloes. And Esther replied, if it pleases His Majesty, allow the Jews who are in Shushan to act tomorrow as they did today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Vayomer Amalek and the king ordered that this be done. A decree was distributed in Shushan, and they hanged the Haman's 10 sons. The Jews that were in Shushan assembled again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and slew 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils. ושאר היהודים אשר בנוס המלך נתקלו ועמוד על נפשו ונוח מאויביהם והרגו בשונאיהם 75,000 ובביתו לא שלחו את ידם. The rest of the Jews throughout the king's provinces organized and defended themselves, gaining relief from their foes, slaying 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay their hand on the spoils. This what happened, there was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, they gained relief on the 14th day, and making it a day of feasting and gladness. But Pasuk 18, but the Jews that were in Shushan assembled on both the 13th and the 14th, and they gained relief on the 15th, making it a day of feasting and gladness. That is why the Jewish villagers who have lived in unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar as the occasion of gladness and feasting for the holiday making and for sending delicacies to one to another. And Mordechai now recorded these events and sent letters to all of the Jews throughout the provinces of the king Achashverosh, near and far. Charging them that they should observe annually the 14th and the 15th of Adar. As days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies, and the month in which they transformed from them from one of sorrow to gladness, and from mourning to festivity, they were to observe these days as feasting and gladness, and for sending delicacies one to the other and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to continue the practice that they had begun, just as Mordechai had prescribed for them. For what happened? For Haman, the son of the Hamadatha, the Agagite, enemy of all the Jews, had plotted to destroy the Jews and had cast a lot to terrify and to destroy them. But when she appeared before the king, he commanded by means of letters that the wicked scheme which Haman had devised against the Jews should recoil on his own head, and they hanged him and his sons on the gallows. Pasuk 26. Therefore, this holiday is called Purim, Al Shem HaPur, for the lot. That is why they called these days Purim, for the word Pur meant lot. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and because of what they had experienced and what has happened to him, the Jews confirmed and undertook upon themselves and their posterity, and upon all who might join them, to observe these 2 days without fail in the manner prescribed at the proper time each year. In the last pasuk for today, consequently, these days should be remembered and celebrated by every single generation, family, province, and city. These days of Purim should never cease among Jews, nor shall their remembrance perish from their descendants. Okay, we're going to stop there. But what you got in this parak is the longest parak in the Megillah. And what is it recounting? It's recounting how the enemy is killed, Mordechai gains stature, and he becomes the leader, and Esther gets what she wants, and we kill our enemies. And what happens? Haman and his sons are hung on the tree. Okay, what the Rav does in this parak is the parak that describes for us what this holiday is all about And this is the parak, this is the chapter that teaches us also. 1 second, somebody's trying to gain entrance. Let me give them entrance. Okay. And this parak is the one that gives us all the laws pertaining to how we celebrate the holiday of Purim. It's right here. And what the Rav does is he reads very carefully, in particular, where there are laws, and not only teaches us halachot, which are some fascinating halachot, but also moral lessons that can be learned from each of these psukim. So let's go and take a look at what the Rav studies on this parak. Jump to verse 10. What's happening for the first 10 psukim? We're told that Mordechai has become prominent, and the tenth, and we gain the right to defend ourselves. And not only that, that day in Shushan Habira, we killed 500 men, and we killed whom? The 10 sons, right? Aseret, you have all the 10 sons, and then it says Aseret b'nei Haman, the 10 sons of Haman. These are the 10, and then it says Aseret b'nei Haman. And the Rav notes, by carefully reading the Rambam's halachos in Hilchos Megillah, the Rambam codifies the halachos in 2 chapters. All of the halachos in Purim are 2 chapters. All of the halachos in Hanukkah are 2 chapters. And they're combined. 2 chapters for Hanukkah, 2 chapters for Purim, and they're called Hilchos Hanukkah Upurim in the Rambam. It's at the very end of the halachos pertaining to all of the holidays, which is Hanukkah and Purim in the Rambam. And the Rambam Hilchos Megillah, the 2nd chapter, halacha 12, base, Yud base, the Rav reads it very carefully. He says there are 2 customs that you're all very familiar with, and they were instituted from this chapter. But the Rav reads the Rambam carefully, and he says those customs are only obligated when you read the Megillah in a minyan. If I would read the Megillah by myself, or if I would read in a less than 10 people present, can I still read the Megillah? 100%. Can I fulfill the obligation of reading the Megillah? 100%. You don't need a minyan. It's preferable. It's 100% preferable. You should try by all means. But let's say I'm traveling and I have to go on a business trip and I have to take my Megillah with me. Do I still read my Megillah at night and day? Yes. Do I read it alone? Yes. But I don't do the following 2 customs. These are customs only for a minyan. If you're reading it alone, they're not part of the halacha. Why? Because when Rab's going to demonstrate, the Rambam feels there are 2 actions, there are 2 minhagim that emanate from this chapter that are taught to us. That why were they instituted? Because they manifest the miracle. They're mefarsem hanes. They demonstrate, they reveal, right? They publicize the miracle. And how do you publicize a miracle? You publicize a miracle in a community setting. You don't publicize a miracle individually. You publicize in a community setting. The first custom relates to this very pasuk, and it's the listing of the 10 sons of Haman. How must you read the 10 sons of Haman?
I'm taking a breath.
Okay, it's pretty hard, but that's exactly how that. Who does that? The Baal Koreh. The Baal Koreh has to read it in one breath. Why does he read it in one breath? So the Rambam says, in order to inform the public that all 10 were hung and killed at once. They were killed on the same day at the same time. They were all killed as one. The Rav notes this instruction is only when there is a community. And I read the Rav. The reciting of the names of Haman's sons in one breath isn't defined as a condition of the Megillah reading, which would require even an individual as well to follow that. It's not a condition of reading. Rather, it's a fulfillment of publicizing the miracle. And how do you publicize the miracle? That's only applicable in the context of a tzibur, of a community. So this halacha of reading the 10 names, who is it obligated upon? The Baal Koreh. And in what setting? In a minyan. So if I have my own Megillah on the side and I'm following, I don't have an obligation to read the 10 names like that. If I'm reading alone, I don't have an obligation to read the 10 names on that. Only if it's in a community, because the Rambam writes, Kedei lohodia lechol ha'am. It was instituted to let everybody in the nation know. Well, how do we define a nation? It's not individual, it's rather a community. And that's the halacha in a community. The second minig is another minig that you're very familiar with. And the Rav again demonstrates that the Rambam is teaching this from the Megillah itself, but it will not apply to my reading alone. And that is, how do you shape the Megillah? Do you just unroll it like a Torah, like a scroll, or do you fold it over like an Igeret? It looks like a letter, right? You see the Balkari before he begins. He takes a few columns and bends and spreads it out, and then bends the next column. He opens it not like a scroll, but like an Igeret. One flap on top of another flap, on top of another flap, on top of another flap. Why does he do that? This is also required only when there's a minyan, because this too was to publicize the miracle. It was an igeret. The pasuk says in the Megillah that it was written like an igeret. The Rav notes, by reading the Rambam carefully, something else happens. If you read the Rambam carefully, the Rambam says not the way I just described it. I said before the Balkari begins, what does he do? He folds over the pages, right? And he holds over the parchment. And that's not the way the Rambam reads it. He says he does that after he finishes reading it in public. Umina kol Yisrael, these are the words of the Rambam. And the Rav reads it very carefully. Umina kol Yisrael, it's custom throughout the Jewish people. Shahakorei ha-Megillah, the one who reads the Megillah, korei ufoshet ki igeret. Korei ufoshet ki igeret. He reads it and he folds it over like an igeret. The Rav notes, the Rambam says the Balkore, the one who's reading the Megillah, folds it into a letter not before he reads it, but when? After he reads it. What's he doing? What's the Balkore, according to the Rambam, doing? He's doing show and tell. He's saying, ladies and gentlemen, realize, you should know that this is part of the miracle. But not when before he reads it, no. Because the Rambam read what? Read it again. The Rav is reading very carefully the Rambam in typical fashion. Uminek Yisrael, all Israel follows the following custom. Shahakore HaMegillah, the one who reads it, follow the order. Korei ufoshet to Igeret. He reads it and he folds it like an Igeret. What does he do first? Reads. It should have said poshet ukorei. If you're reading it folded, what would you say? Poshet, fold it, the korei, right? No, the Rambam writes korei uposhet. Oh, the Rav says the Rambam was of the feeling of the idea that it was like a show and tell. Again, the Rambam is teaching us that custom is done where?
A minyan.
Only by a minyan. Why only by a minyan? Because it was to demonstrate to the whole cloud, to the whole community. Again, the Rambam is teaching this. This is a custom to do what? To manifest the great miracle. It's all part of the show and tell to let everybody know that an enormous miracle occurred on this day. And that is not an obligation of reading, that's an obligation of community. And therefore, who is the one that has to do this? Only the Balkore. So I'm sitting in my chair and I have my Megillah. Do I fold it like an Igeret? No. Only the Balkore on the Bima, who's reading the Megillah, folds it. This is not a halacha in reading. What is the halacha in? The tzibur. It's a halacha the Rambam is defining, and the Rav understands this. A halacha in the community. We have to demonstrate to the world, right? As a community, a great miracle occurred. And how are we doing that? We're doing that in numerous ways. One, he's going to breathe in one breath. He's going to say all 10, right? Why is he doing that? To demonstrate the miracle, right? To manifest the miracle, show and tell. That's part of show and tell too. And what else is he going to do? He's going to fold the Megillah into an Igeret, also demonstrating show and tell. But only he needs to do it if there's a minion present. That's the law, the first law that the Rav knows. Take a look. Continue on to Pasuk Yud Zayin 17. Test Yud Zayin. B'yom 13 lechodesh Adar, v'noach ba'abar asor bo, aso Yom Mishteh V'Simcha. That was the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they gained relief on the 14th day, making it a day of Yom Mishteh V'Simcha. It made it a day of feasting and happiness. Now the Rav does something else. The Rav says, read this very carefully. Read the whole story. We read it before just to get our feet wet, to know what we were going to learn today. You have to know the text. And the Rav says, when you read these psukim, and you come to this pasuk, this is after everything is described. What is described before Pasuk Yud Zayin? How we were given the right to defend ourselves. Achashverosh signed off. And what did we do? We went to war. And were we successful? We were very successful. We wiped out in one day 500 people, right? And we got the upper hand, and we were victorious. Now read this pasuk and watch the rhythm of the pasuk. Read the pasuk and watch the rhythm of this pasuk. It's the 13th of the month, which is, by the way, the 13th of the month is Esther. Now, today, that's V'noach ba'arba asar, V'noach ba'abar asar, and they gained relief on the 14th. They went to war on the 13th, and they were successful on the 14th. They wiped them out on the 13th. They were very successful. V'noach. Now, what's the next rhythm? The rhythm of the pasuk. Just read it. What's the rhythm of the pasuk? V'aso yom mishteh v'simcha. Who's them? Tell me what happened in this pasuk in verse 17 in pasuk Yud Zayin. Just tell me what you're reading. The rhythm. What's the rhythm of the pasuk? They went and what?
And then they celebrate
Spontaneously. That's the important word. Spontaneously, they created Purim. The original Purim, the first Purim ever to be celebrated, was not dictated by Mordechai per se. Also, Yom Mishteh B'Simcha. The Rav says this suggests it's a brilliant reading of the pasuk, but it's paying attention to the rhythm of the pasuk. Also, Yom Mishteh B'Simcha. There was no pasuk. It was spontaneous. They celebrated the very next day. The miracle occurred. The miracle of salvation was so unexpected. Nobody thought that we were going to win.
You want some Tylenol?
1 second.
1 or 2.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. Yeah. She wants. Okay. The miracle of salvation was so unexpected. The Jews in Shushan thought they were doomed to be killed, and they were. But the story turned on its head, didn't it? V'nafochu. That's what we sing, right? V'nafochu. Asher yishlutu haYehudim hema v'tzoneim. What do you mean? It was terrifying. It was like a blink of an eye. Yesterday we thought we were going to be doomed. We thought Haman and his cronies were going to wipe out the Jewish people in the provinces of Achashverosh. And what happened? Overnight, a blink, and we were successful. And we got the upper hand. And what did they do? V'aso mishteh v'simcha. Spontaneously, we responded with creating a day of mishteh v'simcha. They threw a party. They didn't wait for Mordechai and his Bezdin to declare, by the way, we're now going to celebrate Purim. The first Purim, if I would ask you from the Megillah, tell me, and this is the inside of the Rav, the first Purim ever to be celebrated. Who instituted it? The people. That's the important word. The people did. And the Rav then said something phenomenal. He says, and listen to this. The Rav said the same kind of behavior happened in 1967 after the Six-Day War. The situation which Israel found itself, these are the words of the Rav, before 1967 was similarly unimaginable. He says it was just like Purim. We wiped out. Simply, the Jews in Israel were trapped like an animal with all routes of escape sealed off. All of us that were old enough remember this very vividly. They were trapped like animals. Literally, all routes of escape were sealed off. And the best case scenario, they expected 60,000 to 75,000 Jews to be killed. The casualties beforehand, Israel government thought if we do well, we'll only lose 60 to 75,000 Jews. The day after the 6-day war, there was ecstasy. There was spontaneous celebration, the Rav wrote. He says, I understand this puzzle. I lived through it. I saw it with my own eyes. It was the 6-day war. You want to understand Purim? He said, you don't have to. You can understand it. This generation, can understand what Purim is. Also, Yom Mishneh B'Simcha. Immediately, they spontaneously responded. But this is brilliant reading of a pasuk. We read these pasukim, and when do we notice? Purim came. No, Purim evolved. This chapter is teaching us the evolution of the holiday of Purim. So if you were to be asked, who instituted the first Purim? The people. Immediately, because it was a spontaneous celebration. What just happened to us? We were supposed to be wiped out. We were supposed to be killed in the 6-day war. That's exactly, I remember as a child, I was 12 years old. I remember it vividly. I remember my father watching the TV and seeing the Jews, they showed that we had a little black and white TV. I remember it was on the kitchen table, and watching the newsreels right after Shavuot, all of the Jews going in Yerushalayim to the Kotel. And if you remember, they hadn't cleared out the way. It was a narrow path that they could get to. We can walk in the old city today. That wasn't the way it was in 67. And I remember my father bursting into tears of celebration. It was unbelievable. It was the ultimate celebration. Wow, we were supposed to be destroyed. We weren't. We survived. Continues on. Go on now, post the Yud Tet. Further on in the page. 2 psukim later, the Rav notes. Al kain hayudim hapirazim hayoshvim ba'orei haprazot osim es yom arba asar lechodesh ador simcha umishte v'yom tov umishloach manos ish l'reyehu. Simcha, what did they do? What did they create? A day of simcha, of mishte. What's mishte? Partying, the Suda, that's correct. V'yom tov, and like a holiday. Umishloach manos ish l're'ehu, and mishloach manos in one to another. The Rav wants to understand. Here, they're describing the personality of this holiday, the identity of Purim. The personality of this holiday is, how would you describe it? Sharing with one another, right? In particular, we share la halacha. We're going to see we share la halacha. Those in this pasuk is missing, and we'll talk about that in 2 seconds too. But we share in particular with the poor. Purim is a day of sharing. The Rav says. If I would have to describe the personality, every holiday has its personality. Pesach. What's Pesach? Pesach is remembering. It's reliving. I shouldn't say remembering. Not remembering. It's reliving the story, right? Shavuot is learning Torah, right? It's a celebration. Sukkot is a celebration of Simcha in itself, of total faith in God. That's the personality. I believe, God, you can protect me. I can live on outside without a roof on my head, with just a schach, and you'll protect me. That's the personality of Sukkot. What's Purim? Purim is sharing. Purim is, really, the Rav goes on to explain, Purim is the holiday of community. And people don't realize this, but this has halachic ramifications. Purim is the day of sharing. And the Rav notes, by the way, so is Hanukkah. Hanukkah is sharing, but it's a different sharing. He says Purim is sharing what? Purim is sharing what? It's sharing material wealth. It's sharing food with each other. It's sharing gifts with each other. Purim is a material sharing. Hanukkah is a spiritual sharing. Hanukkah is defined by Simcha v'Hallel. Simcha v'Hallel is the way the halacha talks about Hanukkah. That can only be achieved, the Rav notes, when one shares with the other. Purim and Hanukkah both are holidays that are manifested, that manifest, if you will, that manifest the unity of a community, not the singularity of the Jew, but the community is being celebrated on Purim. They mark, 2 seconds, they mark the common destiny of all Jews. And the Rav writes, and I read this, the individual and the community are not only metaphysical, existential terms, but also historical terms. When an individual is immersed in the community, he knows that he is no exception to the rule. If the community suffers, so does he. That's being a member of a community. We saw this in the Holocaust. We saw it again on October 7th. No one was spared. It didn't matter what you did. It didn't matter if you were a Jew who before October 7th felt that you had to help the Arabs who lived in Gaza and take them to hospitals, right? That's what they did, those kibbutzim right next to it. Did it spare them? No, it didn't spare them at all. The same thing happened in the Holocaust. Did somebody ask, did the Nazis ask, what are your ideologies? Are you religious? Are you not religious? Are you a Zioni? Are you a Bundist? Are you right? Are you a communist? Well, it didn't matter. You were a Jew. You were a member of a collective called Jews. And that's the same thing happened in Purim. The same thing happened on Purim. Haman wasn't asking, what's your ideology? Do you believe that you're going to return to Jerusalem? Are you a Mordecai follower? It didn't matter. It didn't matter whatsoever.
Or even if a great-great-grandmother.
That's correct. That's correct. As long as that's correct. That's correct. The same thing. So we know what the Rav knows. On Purim and Hanukkah, the Reshut Harabim, the public domain, reigns supreme. Brilliant insight. Purim is all about the Reshut Harabim. Because of this, both holidays are not celebrated alone, right? As individuals. Where do we light the Chanukiah? Out in the public, right by the door, we're supposed to light it. But on Purim, where do we celebrate it? We don't celebrate it like individuals. We celebrate it like a community. And we already learned today, right? 2 halachos, that the community observes and the individual doesn't observe. The community observes saying Aseret Yimei Haman in one breath. The community observes falling over Igeris, not the individual. This is a holiday of community, and I read the Rav's words. The symbol of the day, listen to this is brilliant insight. The symbol of the day is not a prohibition against work. We talked about that last week, right? Yom Tov, but we talked about it. It did not get instituted like that. Yom Tov means a day of Isur Melacha, a prohibition of working, like Shabbos and Yom Tov. No, the symbol of this day, that's not what happened to this day. It was not a prohibition against work. It's not a disengagement and a withdrawal. Listen to this brilliant understanding symbolically. On contrary, the symbol of the day of Purim is joining with the community and seeing oneself as an integral part of a greater community which God has concluded with a covenant with. You hear this? It's brilliant. It's not a day of Isur Melacha. What's Isur Melacha? I withdraw myself from the communal sphere, right? That's what Melacha does. If I'm not working, I have to be at home. I have to withdraw myself, if you will. Correct? No, that's not Purim. Purim is rather the symbol of the day is engagement with the community, not disengagement with the community. Jump 2 more psukim. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. The brilliant reading of the pasuk. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. L'kayem aleim liyot sotim es yom 14 lechodesh Adar v'es yom 15 b'chol shana v'shana. So now these 2 days, the 14th and the 15th, become Purim and Shushan Purim, right? Yes, that's what that pasuk says. The Rav notes there's a fantastic question of the halacha we have to know. There's a halachic issue that arises based on this verse, on these psukim. The Rav is learning morals from halacha, a law of morality, a law of understanding Purim through the eyes of the halacha, which comes, of course, through the eyes of the psukim in the Megillah. The Rav notes there's a halachic issue that arises from this pasuk, but it isn't just a halacha. It's not cold halacha. There's a message at the end, and we'll see a moral message, a very important message. The halacha wonders what happens when we have a leap year. Leap year means what? La halacha, not like the secular. It's 28, 29 in February, one day. That's not the halachic leap year. The lunar leap year is what? A whole month. You have an Adar Aleph and an Adar Beis. So the halacha wonders, how do you celebrate two Adars? Meaning, when is Purim celebrated? If Purim celebrated, this was the halachic question. Gemara wanted to know, you have a leap year. Are you going to do Purim in Adar Aleph, or are you going to do Purim in Adar Beis? And so the Gemara concludes in Megillah, Mesechtes Megillah, Vav Amud Beis 6b, it concludes, which one do we do it in? We just had last year a leap year. Which one do we do it in? Number two. The Purim is in June. But if this is our practice, the halacha then wanted to know, tell me the personality of Adar Rishon. Is Adar Rishon anything that we have to be concerned about? How does one treat the day? Purim is not celebrated in the first month. Purim is celebrated in Adar Beis. So what's Adar Aleph? Tell me the personality of it. And the Gemara notes that the first Adar, we only mark it by, the Gemara says, oh yeah, it has a personality, but it's a passive personality. You don't fast on what we call Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan. You don't fast on those days. And what else don't you do? You don't say a eulogy if there's a levaya, if there's a funeral. And that's the way the Rambam and Halacha codifies it. It's codified in Perek Beis Halacha Yegimel in the Rambam and Hilchos Megillah on Adar Beis. Remember, on Adar Aleph, you just don't do what? You don't fast. On Shushan Purim, on Purim Katan, Shushan Purim Katan, no fasting and no eulogy.
Can you go to a cemetery to visit a
You
cemetery?
shouldn't, but
should
you
not.
can, but
That's
you
what they
shouldn't.
say.
It's not a day to go to. No, just no.
Some people don't do that.
No, Nitzon they don't do. Adar, there's no halacha like that. No halacha like that at all. Not Adar, Nitzon. Anyhow, let's focus here. The Rosh disagrees. He proposes that the Gemara suggests that on Adar Rishon, we don't fast and eulogize the dead because that was the practice only when there was a moon that had to be identified via edim, via witnesses. Witnesses would come forward and they would tell us when the new moon was, and Sanhedrin would decide, yes, it's a new moon, right? He proposes that the Gemara is only talking about how do we celebrate Adar Rishon. That was when we used to do it al hariyah, based on witnesses coming to Bezdin and telling us they identified the new moon. That's not the way we do it now. We do it based on a calendar, right? In that period of Jewish history, the Rosh argues the first Adar was crucial because maybe it was the only Adar. Who knows if there was going to be an Adar Sheni? So you have to worry about how to celebrate Adar Rishon. So that's what the Gemara is talking about. But today the Rosh concludes Adar Rishon means zilch. Adar Rishon has no role. So the Gemara says passive, right? Right? You just don't do eulogies and not fast. And the Rosh says that nothing. This Adar Rishon means nothing. There's a third position, and that's the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah suggests there is a custom to increase feasting on Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan. You eat a little more. Never a problem by Jews, right? You eat a little more. You do a little more. You mark it that way. He adds, now there's a moral reason why we do it. Why do you eat a little more on Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan? He quotes a pasuk from Mishlei, Perek Tesvav, pasuk Tesvav, 15:15 in Mishlei, in Book of Proverbs. Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im, V'tov Leiv Mishter Samid. All the days of the afflicted are bad. Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im. All the days of the afflicted are bad. But a cheerful heart has a continual feast. Again, hear this: a person who looks at the world with a negative eye, everything's bad. A person that looks at the world with a good heart, everything's good. That's what Mishlei is saying. And the Rav notes that this pasuk creates the obligation that the Ramah is referring to. The Ramah says, what's Shushan Purim Katan? What's Purim Katan? How do I look at it? I look at it through positive eyes, not through negative eyes. The Jew has to adopt this approach to life. So even though we don't really celebrate Purim Adar Rishon, what's the halacha? The Ramah says, what's the halacha? Add a little. Why? Because don't take it for granted. Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan also have an element of a positive tinge. And you have to have a life of seeing the world with positive eyesight. You have to look at the world with a positive view. That's what the pasuk is saying. And the Rav says, and now I understand the Ramah. Remember, the halacha was, what do I do with Adar Rishon? Not Purim, right? So the Gemara says passively. The Rosh says you don't even have to worry about that. It's nothing. Adar Rishon was important when we used to do the declaration of a new month based on witnesses. We don't do that anymore. So Adar Rishon means nothing. Comes to the Ramah, says, don't throw away Adar Rishon. Don't throw away Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan. Eat a little more. Meaning, what do you mean eat a little more? When you sit at your table, say, today is Purim. Today is a Shushan Purim Katan, right? Today I'm celebrating a little. Why? Because the Jew never takes for granted any day. Any day is a day to celebrate life. That's why. It says, V'tov leiv mishtes samid. Listen to the words. But a cheerful heart has a continual feast. Right? A cheerful heart has a continual feast. This lesson was taught to me this past week. I don't know if you paid attention, that they had on Channel 12, and it became famous because it was translated also, but on Channel 12, Israel TV, the most important interviewer, the lead, most popular interviewer, interviewed Eli Sharabi. Eli Sharabi was one of the hostages. He was the one who lost his wife and lost his two daughters and in Be'eri, and he was taken captive. He agreed to, he thought by him being taken captive, he would, save his children and his wife. And he was taken captive and he didn't know that they were killed. They took him and then they killed them. And he only found out afterwards. So Sharabi was one of the first real hostages to really agree to be interviewed right away. And it's an unbelievable. If you know Hebrew, it's quite a listen. But like I said, I understand. I think there are translations now of the interview as well. But it was unbelievable. He said he's not angry. He's not angry. He describes how he's shackled for almost 500 days. He couldn't move. The shackles hurt him in his skin. He couldn't move this way, that way. He couldn't. And the amount of food was, he was on a hunger strike. He wasn't on a hunger. They turned his life into a hunger strike. They gave him nothing, a half a pita a day. He came back. He was one of the three that you saw, and everybody gasped that he looked like a Holocaust survivor. The Eli Sharabi was there. What does he have to say? What does he says, first of all, he says, I want you to know. He says, you go to your refrigerator and you take food out of the refrigerator? I dreamt of that. Don't take that for granted. I don't take it for granted anymore. You're able to open up your refrigerator and take whatever you want out of your refrigerator? Unbelievable. Don't take that for granted. He said he noted that he's not angry, although he lost his wife and although his two daughters were killed. He says, I'm not angry. Why? How could you not be angry? It just doesn't make sense. He says, how can I be angry? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me a lovely life. He gave me two beautiful children. I had them for whatever years I had them. How can I be angry? How can I? It's mamish the Gemara of Rabbi Meir and Bruria, right?
With their 2 kids. Yeah, the 2
Are you angry at Hashem? Hashem gave you a gift. The gift was for so long that mamish, this Eli Sharabi is like Bruria teaching Rabbi Meir in the Gemara. How long did you? I can't be angry. And then he says something unbelievable. And I have life. I was redeemed. I was freed. I'm going to be angry? Who am I going to be angry at? I'm going to be angry? I can't forget the blessing that I'm alive and now free, he said. This is what the Ramah is teaching us, isn't it? Based on that pasuk from Mishlei. Ve'hatov leiv mishtet tamid. If you have that of you, it's mishtet tamid. It's always a Thanksgiving dinner. That's what Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan become. Purim Katan, Shushan Purim Katan, are they the real Purim? No. But are they days to celebrate and say thank you? Yes. Every day is the day to say thank you. V'tov leiv mishtet tamid. A person who has that kind of perspective of life, he's always celebrating life. The Rav notes there is another lesson that this pasuk teaches us as well. There are 2 aspects to Purim, right? There's the passive element and the active element. The passive element is reflected that on both Purim and Shushan Purim, we don't eulogize and we don't fast. This is deduced from pasuk Chof Aleph. But right in pasuk Chof Aleph, take a look. L'kayem aleim lios osim et yom arba asoy yom chodesh et yom chamisha asor bayom b'chol shana v'shana. Pasuk Chof Aleph teaches us the passive. Then turn to pasuk Chof Beis. Kayomim asher nochu behem hayudim me'evim v'chodesh asher nepach lehem miyom l'simcha u'me'evel liyom tov la'asos osam yemei mishte v'simcha. Suddenly, we went from 21 is the passive to 22 is the active. How am I going to celebrate Purim? There's Purim passively, there's Purim actively. 2 different psukim. The element of celebration is unique to Purim. The first element of Purim is passive, but the second is active. And what did we define it as? The Rav points out, sharing with the other. That's why the Rambam, when he says in Hilchot Chanukah, Perek Gimel, Halacha Daled, the 8 days of Chanukah, these are the words of the Rambam, are like Purim. They are? Are they like Purim? You celebrate Chanukah like Purim? I don't. I don't give any gifts on Chanukah. Chanukah giving gifts is imitation of the Goyim. There's no giving of gifts on Hanukkah. Purim is giving gifts. So what does the Rambam mean when he says like the days of Purim? So the Rav explains the Rambam meant the first element of Purim, which is the passive element. You don't have eulogies on Hanukkah. You don't have fasting on Hanukkah. On both Hanukkah and Purim, though, that's how we celebrate it. But the celebration element of Purim is unique to Purim. It's not celebrated on Hanukkah. We don't give mishloach manos, matanos, lavyonim. We don't do that on Hanukkah. It's interesting to note there's one other day in the Jewish calendar that we have a passive halacha in celebration. Do you know which day?
Pesach Sheni.
Pesach Sheni. No, Pesach Sheni is really not even really celebrated. It's a funny thing. Called Rosh Chodesh.
Oh.
Rosh Chodesh, the Rav points out, in the Beis HaMikdash, Rosh Chodesh was celebrated, with simcha. It was really celebrated with Hallel, etc. That Rosh Chodesh was celebrated with song and trumpets. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, how was Rosh Chodesh celebrated? Passively. An Isur of fasting and a prohibition of eulogies. That was the halacha of Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh and Purim passively. So if I would ask you, passively, which 3 holidays has a passive manifestation of celebration? It's Purim, Hanukkah, Rosh Chodesh. Or if I was doing it chronologically, it's Rosh Chodesh, Hanukkah, and Purim, right? Okay. That's how the Rav reads these psukim. One more pasuk, and then we'll call it a day. Pasuk Chav Beis, where I told you we have the manifestation of the active way to celebrate Purim, right? So take a look. These were the days, wow, that we were where we were able to overcome our enemies. We were victorious. And this were the days when everything turned around. It turned from terrible to good. It turned from days of mourning to days of Yom Tov Lasos. And therefore, what did we do? We made them days of celebration, right? Of partying. Umishloach manos, ish l're'ehu. We send gifts to each other. Umatanos le'avyonim. The Rambam in Hilchos Megillah, Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Zayin, makes a remarkable comment how we achieved Simcha on Purim. Remarkable. He says, it is better for one to use his resources more on Matanos le'avyonim than on any other celebration of Purim. Mishloach manos and Sudas Purim is less important. The most important halacha of Simcha is Matanos le'avyonim. The Rav explains the Rambam is consistent with his view on what creates true Simcha. The Rambam lahalacha defines a philosophical question. How do you gain Simcha? How do you manifest Simcha in your life? And he says, the mitzvah of taking care of the poor is the grander joy. What does that mean? The Rav in Hilchos Yom Tov, Perek Vav Halacha Yud Ches, it's the very end of by Hilchos Sukkah. He says, the Rambam writes the following, the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, we're supposed to do what? We're supposed to have Simcha, right? Listen to the Rambam's words. As he eats and drinks, meaning the Jew, he must feed the convert, the orphan, the widow, together with the poor. But one who locks the door to his home and doesn't bring in the poor into his home on a Yom Tov, this is not rejoicing the mitzvah, but rejoicing of his stomach. Those are the words of the Rambam. And so the Rav says, that's exactly what the Rambam is consistent here. In other words, the mitzvot of Suda, Mishloach Manos are all lovely, but Matanos Lavyonim is the real way to achieve Simcha. We're going to stop here. We'll pick up next week on this pasuk again, because I want to deal with Matanos Lavyonim further, and then we'll finish this parak. There's much more to see on this parak. So this parak, bottom line, just to wrap it all up for you, you have to understand what this parak does. This parak is the evolution on how we celebrate Purim. If you want to understand how we celebrate Purim and how it came about, you have to read this parak very carefully. And that's what the Rav did. And he read it through the eyes of the halacha and learned moral lessons, as we've demonstrated, right? And again, originally, how was the holiday instituted? It was a spontaneous response by the Jewish people, and it evolved accordingly. And in particular, the Rambam notes, Matanos le'avyonim is the most important, because if you're going to gain an appreciation of joy, it's through helping others, right? And the holiday of Purim is unique. It is not about the individual Jew and his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu per se. It's about the Jew being a member of a community. It's a holiday of community more than any other holiday. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll pick this up next week. We have a lot more yet to do, particularly on Matanos Levyonim and the finishing of the parak. Okay?
But thank you.
Is it true? Somebody has a York site on the book. Talk about Adar.
Yeah.
For somebody has a York site.
Yeah,
Adar, somebody got the Adar Aleph. You have to do it both times.
That's the minhag. The Ramah says that that's
Oh,
the
really?
minhag. We do it
Wow.
both. But that's the whole debate. Do I do it on the first, or do I keep the York site on the second? Yeah. Okay.
Thank
So
you,
he says-
Rabbi. Have a great day.
Everybody should have a wonderful day.
Thank you.